behind all this, working through America, is Israel, which wanted, and the documentation and the speeches and all of it exists to be seen, going way back through the 90s and beyond, that they wanted to bring down Iran, and they wanted these regime changes in these countries that have been targeted by America. And so it's no surprise to see this headline. Pompeo, he's the Secretary of State in America, and basically the Secretary of State for Israel, working out of the State Department in America. And Mnuchin, this is Steve Mnuchin, the former Goldman Sachs executive, ultra-Zionist treasurer, Treasury Secretary in America. Pompeo and Mnuchin on Iran sanctions. Their joint press conference on Monday ignored the Trump regime's extrajudicial action. They arrogantly don't give a hoot about world community opposition. 8 countries so far were granted temporary waivers to buy Iranian oil, likely to become permanent next year, directly or indirectly. China, Greece, India, Italy, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and Turkey. Maybe other nations will demand waivers to keep buying Iranian oil under these sanctions. Their legal right. The Trump regime's only action flagrantly unlawful. Because this is now widening, this sanctions war. They're not just targeting countries. They're saying to European countries, and you'll be targeted if you don't agree, if you don't follow the sanctions we've imposed upon Iran. It's tyranny. Trump, Pompeo, and other regime officials called the reimposed sanctions on Iran this week the toughest ever imposed. They target Iranian energy and related products, its central bank and other financial transactions, its shipping industry, and Air Iran or Iran Air, the country's largest airline. Over 50 Iranian banks, their subsidiaries abroad, Tehran's Atomic Energy Organization, and 23 of its subsidiaries, along with hundreds of individuals and entities, were illegally sanctioned. Pompeo threatened the world community, warning of swift punishment on any nations, companies, or individuals doing business with Iran. He said, I promise you that doing business with Iran in defiance of our sanctions will ultimately be a much more painful business decision than pulling out of Iran. And this is Israel talking, who've had Iran in their gun sights for a long time, and they're using America to get what they want. Usual story. This is why the story broke a few weeks ago of how Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, was caught on a recording tape, which he didn't realize was there, talking privately and saying that it was us, Israel, that got America to ditch the Iran deal, the Iran nuclear deal, which had calmed everything down with Iran. But now it's kicked off after this deal was dropped, because that's what Israel want, and that's what America is doing on their behalf. And it's also been reported, which is hardly a shock to me, that another person massively involved in the deletion of the Iran deal was Sheldon Adelson, the American-Israeli billionaire who was Trump's biggest funder. And also that John Bolton, now National Security Advisor to Trump, who goes way back in this story of targeting the countries that Israel wants to regime change, and not least Iran. And the stories reported that it was pressure from Adelson that led to Trump appointing John Bolton. And John Bolton has basically taken over American foreign policy. And this man's never seen a country he didn't want to bomb. So hold on to your hats. And of course, what's happened, again, as a result of Bolton, who went to Russia to deliver this message, nuclear agreements and non-proliferation agreements with Russia have been dropped now by America, i.e. by Israel through America. Once you go below the surface, the story of what's happening, as opposed to the story we're told is happening, is so clear. Last August, Pompeo announced the creation of a so-called Iran Action Group for regime change, and he failed to explain that means by coup d'etat and naked aggression. He said it'll be responsible, this Iran Action Group, for directing, reviewing and coordinating all aspects of the State Department's Iran-related activity and will report directly to me. And as this writer, Stephen Lendman on davidicke.com says, no Iranian threat exists other than its sovereign independence, along with its opposition to Washington's imperial agenda and Israeli apartheid rule. Trump regime State Department Policy Planning Director Brian Hook heads the Iran Action Group, serving as US Special Representative for the Islamic Republic, in charge of the regime change initiative. And as Lendman points out, US dirty hands have been behind efforts to destabilize Iran and topple its government since the 1979 revolution. And I have absolutely no brief for the Iranian regime and the way it imposes its religious will upon the people, none whatsoever. But to say that Iran is a threat to America is utter garbage, and it's a bigger threat to America now as it responds like a cornered rat to what's being thrown at it than ever it was before, during the nuclear deal, when everything had calmed down and people were getting on with their lives. And of course, Iran was on the list of the Israel-created Project of the New American Century in September 2000. Also on the list was Libya and Syria and Iraq. And so you've seen these countries targeted, and Iran's the next on the list. So that's why we're seeing this happen, for no other reason. And of course, involved in those sanctions is Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, an ultra-Zionist who represents Israel and its interests in the Treasury Department of the United States. Where shall we go now? Oh yeah, let's continue with this sanctions situation. Troika of tyranny, US sanctions entirety of Venezuela and warns Cuba and Nicaragua, you're next. Now, Venezuela, Cuba and Nicaragua have been long-term targets of the American government, no matter what party. And so here's the opportunity now to go with sanctions and bring these countries to their knees for all the reasons I described earlier. The US is slapping far-reaching sanctions on Venezuela in its bid to reassert hemispheric domination over what National Security Advisor Bolton, here he is again, dubbed a troika of tyranny in a groan-worthy throwback to Bush's axis of evil, which he was also involved in, Bolton. Goes back through the Bush administration, 9/11, and well before. Troika of tyranny. I mean, someone actually sat down and came up with that. We need another axis of evil. We can't have axis of evil. We've used that one. So what do you reckon? What about troika of tyranny? Oh, yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, I'll use that. And so the moustache with a head on it, Bolton, now talks about the troika of tyranny. And of course, there's not a troika of tyranny. There's a singularity of tyranny, which is the United States. Actually, it's a duality of tyranny because Bolton is a wholly owned subsidiary of Israel. Trump has authorized even stricter sanctions against Venezuela, which is on its bloody knees anyway. And they've been targeting that country for a long, long time. Ostensibly targeting the country's gold sector, but actually going for anyone and everyone deemed to have directly or indirectly engaged in deceptive practices or corruption. Were they talking about themselves? relating to the Venezuelan government by the Secretary of State. Without defining any of those terms, the administration has written itself a blank check to wage economic warfare. And that's what it is. Same with all these other countries. Economic warfare against the already suffering nation. Of course, suffering nation, well, that's what they get off on. People suffering, that's the whole point. That's why they're into Satanism and child sacrifice. They get off on the suffering and terror of others. But, of course, and again, talking of couldn't care less, there is an effect not only on the target countries with these gathering now sanctions, but also on people in America who are trying to make a living. So we have this headline: something's rotting in the state of North Dakota. Panicked farmers hope trade war ends as soybeans pile up. Facing incredible losses in both profits and product, Max Slavo notes that soybeans farmers are desperately hoping that the trade war implemented by President Trump will soon end. Well, don't hold your breath on that one, because it's meant to continue until it brings these countries to their knees. If it brings people trying to earn a living in America to their knees, well, they're just collateral damage. They don't matter any more than the target countries do.